On the far-flung plain of Zendikar, vampires are no stranger to servitude. The insatiable Eldrazi titan of destruction, Ulamog, bent their entire race to his whim, twisting their inner hunger into...
You must gather your party before venturing forth.
I must gather my party? What is... Oh, hey Stevie. Alright, get up here with me and let's continue. Where was I? Oh yeah, okay, so... The vampires, enthralled by the pull of Ulamog's reality-bending hunger, betrayed their plane, seeking only to...
You must gather your party before venturing forth.
Alright, come here and stay put, you little squirt. So, right, the vampires. Zendikar has vampires, you see, and...
You must gather your party before venturing forth.
Alright, comfy, Stevie? All nice and settled then? Alright, great. Zendikar, vampires are cool. Let's just talk about Zagras already. In Magic's newest set, we're headed back to Zendikar. Last time we were here, the plane was being invaded by the Eldrazi. They were all over the place, destroying the entire world, and pretty much the plane was on its last legs. But now the Eldrazi have been dealt with, Zendikar's back on the mend, and we're returning to Zendikar's original identity as the plane of adventure. But what do you need for any good adventure? Well, an adventuring party, of course. So with Zendikar Rising, a brand new mechanic has been introduced, Party. So to put together a good party, you're going to need a group of adventurers to come together, and we'll represent those adventurers with my dog, Stevie. But just like Dungeons & Dragons, when you go out adventuring, you don't want just 4 randos in your party. You want a varied mix of specialized adventurers in your parties, all who can do different things. Like a wizard to cast spells, like a rogue to pick locks, like a cleric to heal your party. And that old D&D classic, you want that big guy with a battle axe at the front of the party, keeping everybody else safe. You want a warrior. So let's finally take a look at our commander, Zagras, the Thief of Heartbeats. Zagras, Thief of Heartbeats, is a legendary vampire rogue that costs 4, a black, and a red. Zagras is a 4/4 with flying, death touch, and haste. He gives other creatures we control death touch, and whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a planeswalker, we get to destroy that planeswalker. And perhaps most importantly, Zagras costs 1 less to cast for each creature in our party. Again, a party is made up of a wizard, a cleric, a warrior, and a rogue. So if we only have a wizard on the battlefield, our Zagras is going to cost 1 less, he'll go down to 5 mana. If we have a wizard and a cleric, he'll cost 4. If we have those 2 and a warrior, he'll cost 3. And if we control a wizard, a cleric, a warrior, and a rogue, if we have all 4 members of our party assembled, Zagras is only going to cost us 2 mana to cast, just a red and a black. So this means wizards, clerics, warriors, and rogues all have some additional value in our deck, because not only are they doing whatever they normally do for their card effects, they're also basically ramp spells in our deck. Every party member that we can assemble is helping to ramp out our commander. But a couple things to note about the party mechanic: if we have 2 creatures out on the battlefield but they're both wizards, that still only counts as having 1 member of our party, because we're looking specifically for 1 wizard, 1 cleric, 1 warrior, and 1 rogue. So having multiples of a single type of creature isn't going to really help with a ramp plan. And secondly, if we have a creature that satisfies multiple parts of the party, like if we had a creature that was both a cleric and a rogue, it would still only count as 1 party member. They have to be 4 different creatures of these 4 creature types. So all that said, we're trying to run as many creatures in those creature types as we can. Take Azure Oddsmaker for example. It's a 3 mana 3/3 warrior, and at the beginning of combat on our turn we can discard a card, and if we do, we get to choose a creature. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player this turn, we get to draw 2 cards. So Azure Oddsmaker can already generate a lot of card advantage, especially with our commander giving all of our creatures death touch, making them really hard to block. But Oddsmaker is also coincidentally a warrior, and that's what our deck really likes to see. This card that's already individually very powerful, powered up even further by acting as a ramp spell for our commander, by being a warrior in our party. Similar to that, we have cards like Magus the Wheel, a card that, again, is just a good value card. It lets us Wheel of Fortune on a creature body, and it's also a wizard, so we get this great utility effect that we want to be running anyway, and we get to staple it together with what is essentially a ramp effect for our commander. And we're running rogues like Robber of the Rich, and whenever Robber of the Rich attacks, if the defending player has more cards in their hand than us, we get to exile the top card of their library, and then during any turn we attack with a rogue, which our commander is also a rogue, we may cast that card, and we may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. So again, a really powerful utility creature, a really good source of card advantage, and combines really nicely with our commander's ability to give all of our creatures death touch. And even our Graveyard Hate can be a member of our party with Withered Wretch, which is a 2 mana 2/2 cleric with an ability saying we can pay 1 mana of any color to remove target card from a graveyard from the game. So it's always really important to have some Graveyard Hate in your deck when you're playing commander, because otherwise you're just going to get hosed by somebody with a crazy graveyard deck. And being able to sneak that graveyard hate into our deck on a cleric so it's also ramping out our commander is really, really strong. And besides our commander, we do have some other cards that care about assembling a party too, like Thwart the Grave, which is a 6-mana sorcery that costs 1 less to cast for each member in our party. So similar to our commander, Thwart the Grave is going to cost 6 if we have no members of our party, and if we have all the members in our party, it's only going to cost 2 mana. And what Thwart the Grave does is it reanimates any creature from our graveyard, and also grabs a cleric, a rogue, a warrior, or a wizard creature from our graveyard and reanimates that as well. So as a double reanimation spell, Thwart the Grave is insanely powerful. It allows us to go grab some big bomb like Harvester of Souls out of our graveyard, while also allowing us to grab any party member out of our graveyard, and most of our deck is just incidentally a wizard, a warrior, a cleric, or a rogue. So for as little as 2 black mana, Thwart the Grave is going to allow us to pull 2 really big bombs out of our graveyard. And one thing to note moving forward, if you look at the bottom right of Grevin's art, I put a little Warrior Stevie icon there. So for the rest of the video, all creatures that are warriors are going to have that little warrior icon in their art. All creatures that are wizards are going to have the little wizard Stevie in their art. And the same for clerics and rogues. So if I forget to mention if something is a cleric or a rogue or a wizard, you can look in the bottom right of the art and you should be able to tell right away. But our commander does more than just cost less for party members. It also has the ability to give all of our creatures Death Touch. This on its face is just pretty powerful. We talked about it with Azra Oddmaker and with Robber of the Rich. Just giving your creatures Death Touch so they can attack in and your opponent has to like trade away a creature if they want to be able to block. It's just kind of powerful on its face, but one of the key strategies of our deck is where this mass Death Touch granting ability really shines, and that's pingers. Cards like Fireslinger, a wizard that can tap itself to deal 1 damage to any target creature or player and 1 damage to ourselves. Now imagine the following board state. We've got our Zagras and we've got our Fireslinger on the battlefield, and one of our opponents has some huge threat on the battlefield. Let's say this gigantic worm with 9 power and 14 toughness. So this thing would normally be incredibly hard to kill, especially through damage, but Zagras gives our Fireslinger Death Touch, and when we tap our Fireslinger and deal 1 damage to the worm, Death Touch applies to that damage as well. So it doesn't matter that the worm has 13 more toughness, it's gonna die anyway. Pingers like Fireslinger have basically been upgraded to read tap to destroy target creature, which is really, really powerful because we can go after our opponent's big threats, we can go after their commanders, and unless that thing is indestructible or can prevent damage in some way, it's gonna die no matter how big it is. So because of how powerful that interaction is, we are running a lot of pingers in our deck. Cards like Blood Cultist, which can tap, again, to deal 1 damage to target creature, and whenever a creature that is dealt damage by Blood Cultist this turn is put into a graveyard, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Blood Cultist. So similar to Fireslinger, not only does Blood Cultist get upgraded to read tap to destroy target creature essentially, she also is going to be growing herself every time she does, so she will eventually turn into this big giant threat as well that'll be able to attack our opponent. Blood Cultist, like Fireslinger, is a wizard, so it helps with our party, but we are running some non-wizard pingers as well. Cards like Bullshock Sorcerer, cards like Cunning Spark Mage, both of which are shamans, and even though these don't help towards our party requirements, they're still just very, very powerful, coming in with haste. And that means if we already have our commander in the battlefield, we can just draw these, play them, and immediately start pinging and killing things without even having to wait for them to come off of summoning sickness like some of our other creatures. And one of our most powerful pingers, and one of my favorite cards in the deck, is Quamboj Witches. Quamboj Witches is a 2-mana wizard that says, tap to deal 1 damage to target creature or player that we choose, and 1 damage to target creature or player of an opponent's choice. Quamboj Witches is incredibly powerful with Death Touch because it basically gets to ping and kill 2 things every time it taps, with a caveat that one of our opponents gets to choose one of those creatures. But that makes Quamboj Witches a really fun and really interesting political tool. So say we have 3 opponents, opponent A, opponent B, and opponent C. And opponent B and C have some big nasty threats like a Jingataxias, Core Augur, and a Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger, 2 of the like nastiest creatures you could have on the battlefield. So we can lean over to opponent A and say, hey, I'll tap Quamboj Witches to destroy that Vorinclex that's giving you a lot of problems, but I'll only do it on the condition that you don't target any of my creatures with their second ping. If they agree, we can give opponent A the choice, and they can point the other ping at the Jingataxias, Core Augur, and that's 2 creatures killed with just a single tap of our Quamboj Witches, which is going to leave us happy, opponent A happy, and opponent B and C completely blown out. But outside of our pingers that just simply say like tap to deal 1 damage to any target, we do have some weird pingers as well. Olivia Voldaren has an activated ability where we can pay 1 in a red to deal 1 damage to another target creature. That creature becomes a vampire in addition to its other types, and we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Olivia Voldaren. And what's really powerful is it doesn't tap Olivia Voldaren to use that ability. So if we have a bunch of mana, if we have, let's say, 8 mana, we can use her ability 4 times, ping 4 different targets, and if she has Death Touch, all those are going to die, and she's going to get 4+1/+1 counters on her. And Olivia Voldaren also has a second activated ability, which is pay 3 black to gain control of target vampire for as long as you control Olivia Voldaren, and that's just proven to be pretty powerful on its own. Even if we don't have our commander on the battlefield, we can play Olivia Voldaren, we can use her ping ability to bite one of our opponent's commanders, and then use her steal ability to steal that commander. And stealing someone's commander can just be really backbreaking against some decks. So Olivia Voldaren is just kind of really powerful on her own. She's just ultra souped up by our commander. Another weird pseudo pinger we have is Brash Taunter. So Brash Taunter is a 5-mana 1/1 with indestructible, and whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target opponent. And we have an activated ability to pay 3 mana, tap our Brash Taunter, and it fights another target creature. So by giving our Brash Taunter Death Touch, it's going to be able to fight and kill basically anything. And it has indestructible, so it'll be a one-sided fight. The opponent's creature will die, but our Brash Taunter will live. And if we have our Brash Taunter fight some big nasty creature, not only is our Brash Taunter going to kill it no matter how big it is, but all that damage that's going to be put on Brash Taunter from the fight is going to be reflected back into our opponent's faces as well. So Brash Taunter with Death Touch can not only be a really insane way to deal with our opponent's threats, but also a good way to just kill our opponents. And another weirdo pinger we have is Fury Stoke Giant. So Fury Stoke Giant is a 5-mana 3/3 giant warrior, and when it comes into play, other creatures we control gain tap. This creature deals 2 damage to target creature or player until the end of the turn. And it also has Persist, which means when it dies, it comes back into play with a -1/-1 counter on it. When Fury Stoke Giant comes into play, it essentially makes all of our creatures pingers. So if we have our commander out and all of our creatures have Death Touch, that means we can just basically ping down the whole board, kill every creature our opponents control, probably all the planeswalkers too. Or if we have a lot of creatures on board, we can even just ignore our opponent's creatures and point all that damage at our opponent's faces and just ping them out of the game. But Fury Stoke Giant isn't the only way we have of wiping the board with our commander's Death Touch ability. We're also running some mass pingers like Fire Ants, which is a 3-mana 2/1 creature, which can tap itself to deal 1 damage to each other creature without flying. So Zagras giving Fire Ants Death Touch can be a great way to wipe the board without actually killing our commander. We're also running Subterranean Spear, which has a very similar effect. It's a 5-mana 3/3 elemental that also says we can tap it to deal 1 damage to each creature without flying. And what's cool about Subterranean Spirit is it also has protection from red, which means red sources can't deal damage to it. So if we have Subterranean Spirit out and we activate one of our other mass pingers like Fire Ants, it's not going to kill the Subterranean Spirit, so that's pretty nice. And if we want a mass pinger to go after some flyers, we have Wojek Ember Mage, which is a 4-mana 1/2 wizard that says we can tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature and also each other creature that shares a color with it. Wojek Ember Mage is one of our more powerful board wipes because it allows us to repeatedly and selectively wipe the board, because with Death Touch we can target a green creature and only kill all the green creatures on the battlefield. We can target a white creature and only kill all the white creatures, or we can target, a 5-color creature and just blow the whole board up if we need to. The interaction between these mass pingers and Zagras giving everything Death Touch means we have access to a lot of one-sided or very, very selective, repeatable board wipes, which is just a really powerful tool to have in our belt, especially when we have creatures like Puppeteer Click, which actively want to be destroyed. So Puppeteer Click is a 5-mana fairy wizard, and when it enters the battlefield, we get to reanimate a creature out of an opponent's graveyard and put it onto the battlefield under our control with haste. Then it gets sacrificed at the end of the turn. So that's a really nice reanimation ability, being able to look through all 3 of our opponent's graveyards and pick out the best creature from any of them, and then put it onto the battlefield with haste is just really, really strong. But also, just like Fury Stoke Giant, Puppeteer Click has Persist. So whenever it dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters on it, we get to return it to the battlefield instantly under our control with a -1/-1 counter on it. So we can do some really messed up plays with Puppeteer Click, like play our Puppeteer Click, target a creature in our opponent's graveyard, we can kill our Puppeteer Click with one of our pingers or one of our mass pingers, bring it back to the battlefield, and then reanimate a second creature with haste out of our opponent's graveyards in the same turn to really just put a ton of pressure on our opponents out of absolutely nowhere. And we also have some creatures that just naturally survive these mass pinging, death touchy, repeatable board wipes. Our Brash Taunter is indestructible, so even with our mass pingers having death touch, he's going to be surviving those, and he's going to be throwing all that damage back at our opponent's faces. And also we have Perforos the Bronze-Blooded, which is not only another indestructible creature, but it also gives all of our creatures haste, so all of our pingers can enter the battlefield and immediately start killing our opponent's creatures. And it also has an activated ability where we can pay 3 mana to cheat some creatures into play, which can be pretty good too. But we also have some mass pingers that are truly one-sided, only dealing damage to our opponent's creatures. Cards like Goblin Chain Whirler and Daggercaster. Chain Whirler and Daggercaster both essentially have the same ability, entering the battlefield and dealing 1 damage to each of our opponents and 1 damage to all of their creatures. That means with our commander on the battlefield, these cards are truly Plague Winds, just entering the battlefield and destroying all creatures that we don't control. And it makes Chain Whirler and Daggercaster, which happen to be a warrior and a rogue, some of the most powerful creatures in our arsenal. But to take it one step even further, we have cards like Inferno Titan, which does 3 damage divided amongst any targets when it enters the battlefield, and Bogardan Hellkite, the big granddaddy of pingers that when it enters the battlefield, it does 5 damage divided as we want among any number of targets. And Bogardan Hellkite has flash, so we can do it at instant speed. So if our opponents have some big scary board, if they have an Atraxa and a Chulane and an Ember and a Consecrated Things, or even if they're in the middle of an infinite combo with Palancron, we can flash in our Bogardan Hellkite at instant speed, target 5 different creatures, and thanks to our commander giving it Death Touch, it reads destroy 5 target creatures when it enters the battlefield, which is just insanely powerful. So all these creatures that allow us to ping our opponent's creatures, to ping their commanders for damage, are just really powerful combos with our commander and some of the most powerful things we can do in our deck. But it's not the only way we can take advantage of our commander giving all of our creatures Death Touch. There's other abilities that combo really well with Death Touch too, abilities like First Strike. Bloodmark Mentor is a 2-mana Goblin Warrior that gives all of our red creatures First Strike. So with Mentor giving our creatures First Strike and our commander giving our creatures Death Touch, our creatures are going to be almost impossible to actually defeat in combat because that First Strike damage is going to happen first and it's going to be Death Touching. So any creatures that are blocking our creatures or being blocked by our creatures are going to have that First Strike damage dealt to them and instantly die thanks to Death Touch before they ever connect and hit our creature back. And this is doubly true for, well, Double Strike, because a double striking creature is going to be dealing that Death Touching First Strike combat damage and also a second Death Touching damage in the normal combat step. So if we have Zagras out giving everything Death Touch and we attack with our Prophetic Flamespeaker, our opponent has to not only be able to double block to kill the Prophetic Flamespeaker because the first striking damage is going to kill whatever blocks it first, they also have to be willing to lose both of those creatures they block with because the first strike damage is going to kill the first one and the regular damage is going to kill the second one. And it makes cards like Prophetic Flamespeaker just really hard to block, which is great because if Flamespeaker isn't getting blocked, every time it deals combat damage to a player, we get to exile the top card of our library and play it this turn. So if our opponents don't block it, it's going to be generating us tons of card advantage. If our opponents do block it, they're going to be losing at least 2 creatures. And even then, that's assuming we don't have any pingers on the battlefield. You know, if our opponent double blocks and we have pingers on the battlefield, we can ping one of those blockers down to save our Flamespeaker. Just becomes really, really difficult for anybody to actually effectively block us once we start stacking up these First Strike and Double Strike abilities with our commander. Another ability that stacks up really well with Death Touch is Trample. Take Neheb for example, he's a 5/4 warrior with Trample. If we have our commander on the battlefield so our Neheb has both Trample and Death Touch, when it attacks and our opponent blocks, we only have to deal 1 damage to our opponent's blocking creature and the rest can trample over and hit our opponent in the face. Because the way Trample works is we only have to deal lethal damage to our opponent's creature and all excess damage goes to our opponent's face. So that means unless our opponent blocks our Neheb with 5 creatures and is willing to lose all 5 of them, we're going to be able to get at least 1 point of damage through to our opponent's face, which will trigger Neheb's ability and allow us to discard our hand, draw some new cards, and make a whole bunch of mana. We also have an ability Lord for trampling with Archetype of Aggression, which is a 3-mana warrior that gives all creatures we control trample and takes trample away from any creatures our opponents control. So all of these ability lords are great on their own, but if we can stack them all up together, if we can make all of our creatures have Death Touch, First Strike, and Trample, it just becomes almost impossible to block any of our creatures without just losing your whole board. Judith, the Scourge Diva, gives us another angle of attack when taking advantage of our commander's ability to give everything Death Touch. Judith gives all of our other creatures +1/+0, which is pretty nice, but also whenever a non-token creature we control dies, Judith the Scourge Diva deals 1 damage to any target. So if we have Zagras and Judith out and our opponent kills any of our non-token creatures, we get to ping a creature or a player on the way out, and if we ping a creature, thanks to Death Touch, that creature's gonna die. Also, Judith includes herself, so if something kills our Judith, we still get to ping any target, and even though Judith is in the graveyard and not on the battlefield anymore, the ping from her death is going to use her last known stats as she was on the battlefield. So the ping is still going to have Death Touch, even though Judith isn't on the battlefield and benefiting from our commander anymore. Similar to Judith, we have Dreadhorde Butcher, which is a 2-mana 1/1 warrior with haste, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, we put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then, whenever it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. You can see how cards like Dreadhorde Butcher and Judith doubly benefit from the Death Touch that our commander provides, because if they attack in and our opponents decide to block, not only is our opponent going to be losing whatever creature they block with thanks to Death Touch, when these creatures die and they get to ping something, that death is going to carry over through death and kill another thing as they're going out the door. And that's also why we're running some sacrifice effects like Lyzolda the Blood Witch, a 3-mana 3/1 cleric that allows us to pay 2 mana, sacrifice a creature, and deal 2 damage to a target creature or player if the sacrificed creature was red, and draw a card if the sacrificed creature was black. So if we sacrifice, say, our Dreadhorde Butcher to Lyzolda, we get to draw a card because it's a black that creature, deal 2 damage to something because it's a red creature. That damage will be death touching, so something will probably die. Dreadhorde Butcher itself will ping something when it dies. Again, that death touch is going to carry over even though it's not on the battlefield, so it'll kill something too. So we can really just set up these scary board states where our opponents are afraid to kill our creatures, because if they do, we're going to be able to take revenge and use that death ping to take one of their creatures down with us. One of the most singularly powerful cards to combine with Zagras is Warstorm Surge. So Warstorm Surge is a 6-mana enchantment that says when a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. There's a good number of enchantments like Warstorm Surge in Magic, but the way these cards are usually phrased is that the enchantment itself is the thing dealing the damage. But for Warstorm Surge, it's the creature itself dealing that damage equal to its power to any target. Because Zagras has Death Touch, Warstorm Surge effectively gives Zagras the ability, when Zagras enters the battlefield, destroy target creature, which is just obviously nuts by itself. But when we have Zagras on the battlefield, all of our creatures are going to enter the battlefield, deal damage equal to their power to any target, and because Zagras gives them all Death Touch, that's going to mean they're going to be destroying almost anything regardless of size. And if we've already just Warstorm Surge down all of our opponent's creatures or ping them all away, we can't just point all that damage at our opponent's faces. So Warstorm Surge is not only just an insane combo with our commander, it's a great way to finish out the game once we've kind of cleared the board as well. And giving all of our creatures Death Touch means a Death Touch Lord like Hooded Blightfang is really powerful in our deck as well. Hooded Blightfang is a 3-mana 1/4 snake with Death Touch that says whenever a creature we control with Death Touch attacks, which is going to be all of our creatures thanks to Zagras, each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. So if we slap Hooded Blightfang onto the battlefield and we attack with 10 creatures, all of our opponents are going to lose 10 life before combat damage is even applied, and we're going to gain 10 life. And with Hooded Blightfang and Warstorm Surge and our pingers being able to go right at our opponents' faces, we have a ton of ways to make our opponents lose life directly. And because of that, Rakdos Lord of Riots is an absolute bomb in our deck. So Rakdos Lord of Riots is a 4-mana 6/6 demon with flying and trample. Creature spells we cast cost 1 less to cast for each 1 life our opponents have lost this turn. So just insanely powerful when we're able to deal so much indirect damage. But usually Rakdos Lord of Riots has a pretty big downside too, in that you can't cast it unless your opponent's lost life this turn. But with the sheer amount of pingers we have that we can just shoot our opponent in the face with, and cards like Hooded Blightfang to drain our opponent, and even just the fact that it's really hard to block our creatures thanks to Death Touch, means that we can almost always cast Rakdos, no problem at all. So the ability to so freely and easily kill our opponent's creatures and really control the creature game is one of the strongest aspects of our deck. But we can crank that up even further by having cards that directly benefit from creatures dying. Cards like Harvester of Souls, a 6-mana demon that says whenever another non-token creature dies, we get to draw a card. So every time we ping down one of our opponent's creatures, we're also drawing a card. Whenever our opponent goes after one of our creatures, we get to draw a card. So Harvester of Souls is a way we can turn our really powerful creature control aspect into a really great card advantage engine. We're also running Grim Harrowspecs, which is a 3-mana wizard that says whenever another non-token creature that we control dies, we get to draw a card. So not quite as strong as Harvester of Souls, which triggers off of any death, but still pretty good protection. You know, if our opponent wraths us, we get to draw a bunch of cards, or if we're sacrificing creatures to our Lyzolda, or trading our Death Touchers in combat, we have to keep drawing cards, churning through our deck, and keeping the pressure on our opponents. Deathbringer Thoktar is another way we can really benefit off of creatures dying, because whenever any other creature dies, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Deathbringer Thoktar, and then we can remove a +1/+1 counter from Deathbringer Thoktar to deal 1 damage to any target. So just on its face with how rapidly we kill creatures, that seems really powerful, right? We get to kill creatures, put +1/+1 counters on our Thoktar, and then our commander gives Deathbringer Thoktar Death Touch as well, so we can remove counters and ping creatures and kill those as well. But combined with Zagras, Deathbringer Thoktar is even better than that, because whenever a creature dies, Deathbringer Thoktar gets a +1/+1 counter on it. Then we can remove that +1/+1 counter to ping something, and because it has Death Touch thanks to our commander, that thing's gonna die. When that thing dies, we put a +1/+1 counter on Deathbringer Thoktar, which we can then remove that counter to kill something else, which then puts another +1/+1 counter on Deathbringer Thoktar, which then kills something else. Thoktar plus Zagras means we can effectively kill every creature on the board that we want to, without actually killing any of our creatures, or, you know, if there's a creature we want to leave alive for whatever reason, we can choose to do so. And every time we use Thoktar to kill something, we're going to put a counter back on it, which is going to allow us to kill the next thing, and so on and so on. So, in addition to Deathbringer Thoktar being this big, scary, growing threat because we can kill creatures so easily, it can also just kind of be like an infinite removal spell. But in my opinion, the single best card in our entire deck that combos with the strategy we're going for is Thrilling Encore. So Thrilling Encore is a 5-mana instant that says, put onto the battlefield under our control all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So Thrilling Encore is usually balanced by the fact that it costs 5 mana, because usually if you're going to be killing a lot of creatures, you're going to be spending a lot of mana to do it. You know, if you're going to cast a Wrath of God that's already 4 mana, are you really going to have the 5 mana left over to also cast a Thrilling Encore to get all those creatures back? But our deck is unique in that we don't have to spend mana to wipe the board. Between our pingers and our mass pingers, and our creatures that deal damage when they die, and our creatures that just demand to be blocked but have death touch, we're just absolutely overloaded on ways to kill creatures while spending 0 mana. So imagine a board state like this, where we've got Zagras, we've got Fire Ants, but we've got nothing else on our side of the board. And our opponents have some really scary stuff. They have Agent of Treachery, they have Eternal Witness, they have Sun Titan, they have Avenger of Zendikar, they have Queen Marchesa, they have Seedborn Muse, Notion Thief, Yarok, whatever. They have a ton of threats that are super scary and are going to kill the crap out of us. Well, we can tap our Fire Ants, deal 1 damage to everything, which kills everything because of death touch. Then that's cost 0 mana to do. We can pay 5 mana, Thrilling Encore, and we get all those threats. We get all their end of the battlefield triggers. We get to steal stuff with Ancient of Treachery. We get to get stuff back with Eternal Witness, Sun Titan, Avenger of Zendikar, Queen Marchesa makes us the Monarch. We get all those threats we just wiped away directly back onto our side of the battlefield, permanently stealing all of our opponent's creatures for just 5 mana, which is just insane. Like, there's no cards like that in Magic. So this crazy extreme nutso synergy with our deck strategy makes Thrilling Encore my favorite card in the entire deck. And before we wrap up this deck tech, let's talk about a few potential upgrades you can make to the deck. If you want to spend a little more money to really soup up the deck and make it like ultra powerful. And a lot of these are just cards that fulfill our party requirements that are just too expensive for us to slot into a budget deck. Cards like Macaeus the Unhallowed, which gives all of our creatures Undying and is also a cleric. Twilight Prophet, which is also a really powerful cleric that can kind of draw some cards and drain our opponent out. Gordons of the Havoc Razor, which is a great source of card advantage and a great source of opponent disruption with goading, and is also a 2-mana rogue, which is really nice for ramping us. The Heavy Eternal, which is just insane in our deck thanks to all of our pingers. We can just generate a ton of red mana every single turn. Combat Celebrant, which is a warrior that can exert itself to give us extra combat steps, and it usually just gets blocked by something bigger and dies, but you get the extra combat step out of it anyways. But with our commander giving it death touch, that means at least it's going to be trading for something. It doesn't just get eaten by something when it attacks. Drawn of the Last Blood Chief, another new card out of Zendikar Rising, which is a really powerful way to continually reanimate cards out of our graveyard, and giving Drawn a death touch is actually pretty great because her ability triggers when she attacks. So if we don't have any safe attacks into our opponents, if they all got flyers and they're all going to eat our Drana, we can at least give her death touch. We'll have to actually trade a creature if they block Drana at least. Goblin Spymaster is a 3-mana rogue that's a really nice combo in our deck. First off, he just has First Strike naturally, so that combined with Death Touch makes him a really good threat in our deck. But also, he gives each of our opponents a 1/1 red goblin creature token that makes all of their creatures attack. That means if they try to attack us with their creatures, we can just eat them all up with our Death Touchers. And if they're not attacking us because of our Death Touchers and they're attacking our other opponents instead, well, fine. We're happy about that, right? We want them to be killing each other. So Goblin Spymaster is pretty powerful and pretty sneaky good in our deck. Kalida's Trader of Get is a 4-mana warrior with the ability whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, instead exile it and put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. Just really good with our, kind of creature control, destroy everything strategy. We get to make zombie tokens every time a creature's opponent dies, and it gets exiled, which can be really devastating against a lot of like graveyard-based decks that are planning to recur the creatures over and over again. Kalidas just means once one of our opponent's creatures is dead, it's dead for good, and we get to make a zombie token out of it. So a super nice combo with our strategy, and then some creatures that don't really fulfill party member roles but are still really good in our deck are Goblin Sharpshooter, which kind of does the same thing Thoktar does, where once we give it Death Touch, we can tap it to kill a creature, which then untaps it, which we can tap it then to kill a creature, so we can kind of selectively clear the board just like Thoktar can. But Sharpshooter is only 3 mana where Thoktar is 6, so Sharpshooter is just a really nice inclusion if you can afford them. Ink Eyes, Servant of the Oni, can be really great in our deck because all of our little creatures are going to have Death Touch, so we can attack in with them and our opponent can't easily block them. And if they get through, we can ninjutsu in Ink Eyes, start reanimating creatures out of our opponent's graveyard. Keverick the Merciless, whenever an opponent casts a spell, it gets to deal damage to any target equal to that spell's converted mana cost. So sort of a Punisher pinger. If we get Keverick on the battlefield with our commander, it means our opponents can't cast anything without us being able to kill creatures, or if all the creatures are dead, we can just start throwing that damage at our opponent's face, which is pretty nice. Finally, Surzoth Chaos Rider, which is a newish card out of Jumpstart, which is kind of meant to be like a devil tribal commander, but would still be really good in our deck too, because it says whenever an opponent draws their first card each turn, if it's not their turn, you create a 1/1 red devil creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target, and then it also has whenever 1 or more devils you control attack 1 or more players, you and that player each draw a card and discard a card at random. So Surzoth is a way to kind of sift through our deck, but more importantly, he generates a bunch of 1/1 devil tokens that ping when they die, and as we've established, creatures that die and then ping are really good with our commander because they kind of take advantage of the Death Touch on both sides of things. They can block something and then kill it because they have Death Touch, and then when they die, they get to ping something, and that ping is going to have Death Touch because their token did. So a way to continually generate these devil tokens is pretty powerful if you can stretch for it in the budget. And anyway, that's going to wrap it up for our Zagras budget commander deck. So Zagras is a really unique commander, and I think it's going to be a really different deck than pretty much anything else you go up against. It's sort of this unique unique Rakdos control deck that you're not really going to see anything else like, especially with the building around the party mechanic, meaning you're running all these interesting creatures that are powerful and good, but you just don't see that much in Commander because maybe there's something that's slightly better that's not a warrior or a cleric or a rogue or a wizard. But thanks to Zagras' party ability, we get to run all these interesting creatures, and moving forward in Magic, of course there's going to be more warriors and wizards and rogues and clerics, so I feel like this deck is going to be continually upgradable moving forward. Set after set, you're going to get more cards to add to the deck. Anything that's in red and black and is a warrior or a cleric or a rogue or a wizard is worth considering because they're just sort of naturally powerful, even if what they do isn't that impactful, because they're helping you ramp out your super ultra powerful commanders. So anyway, this has been your Zagras budget commander deck tech. This has been 2D, and I'll see you next time.